The geographical distribution of the wolf in Britain seems to have been wider and less local than that of any of the animals already alluded to. There is scarcely a county in which either its remains or documentary evidence of its existence has not come to light. On the wild Yorkshire wolds, packs of wolves simply swarmed and ravaged the country far and near. This refers to the time from which history first takes cognizance to the date of their extinction at the latter part of the 15th century. The wolves survived in Scotland and much longer than in England, to the middle of the 17th century in fact, and in Ireland even 20 years later, so that the wolf was the last to survive of all the great extinct animals, or at least those which remained absolutely in a state of nature. Nor is this to be wondered at if the wolf's nature be taken into account. A skulking marauder, it found harbour among the thickets of the wooded hills where few cared to follow it. Its form, less bulky than that of the bear or reindeer, coupled with its crafty wariness, rendered it less conspicuous than the other creatures of the wild, and these facts taken in conjunction may account in some measure for its late survival. When the woods abounded with game in summer and autumn, the ravages of the wolf were both less felt and noticed than in winter. At the latter season it was that the packs of wolves banded themselves together and became at once a terror and a dread, not only to the few travellers of the time, but to the sparsely scattered population. All ordinary means of extermination failed, and the wolf reigned, through severe winters, as a power for evil to be guarded against, even in many of the ordinary outdoor employments of the period. The bloody ravages and encounters of which January was characteristic became with our ancestors Wolf's Month. Wolves had their dens, to which they dragged their prey and reared their young among the smaller caves and rocks of the thickets, and it was when these latter were produced that circumstances best offered for their destruction. And thus it is that we find in the records kept by the religious houses of the period the items of wolves' heads upon which prices were set. These items were the equivalents to the entries of the heads of foxes, badgers, martins, wildcats, eagles, ravens and owls of a later period, or even of our own day. It is to these latter sources that we must look for documentary and historical evidence of wolves in Yorkshire, whilst the caves furnish the evidence of a still earlier period. The remains of the wolf have been found in every one of the important Yorkshire caverns, Kirkdale, Albert, Victoria and Dowker Bottom. The evidence, as already stated, after these cave finds is of an historical nature. The first of these is an early one of the time of Athelstan, at Flixton, a point on the wolds where wolves seem to have been exceedingly abundant. Then there is evidence more or less direct, which, as Messrs. Clark and Roebuck tell us, points to Roche Abbey in 1186, Bolton in Waltheof 1306, Whitby 1396, the forests of Nesborough and Galtres, Marske in Swaledale, Woolley, Dodworth, Silkston, Oughton, Ulley and Slade Hutton. References to these localities will be taken in detail. Mention of the wolf as to remains belonging to the first period and necessarily found in a more or less fossil state as thus seen will be found in Professor Boyd Dawkins' list as being treated as follows: Yorkshire, Bulbeck's, Museum of York, Phil Mag, Vol 6, page 225, Kirkdale, British Museum, Museum Geological Society and Royal College of Surgeons, Buckland, Transactions of the Royal Society, 1822, Clift, Id, 1823, page 90. To this list Mr. Harting adds the following habitats, which may be considered more or less local: the forest on Ribblesdale in Northumberland, the great forests of Blackburnshire and Bowland in Lancashire, Richmond Forest, Yorkshire, Sherwood Forest, Nottinghamshire, Savernake Forest, Wilts, the New Forest, the forests of Bere and Irwell, and many others. Immediately after the era of which geological remains furnish us history makes frequent mention of the wolf. The ancient Britons hunted it, as did also the Romans and probably wolfhounds,
were by them taken to the continent, where it would seem these British dogs were well known and esteemed. Hunting formed one of the chief amusements of the wealthy Saxons, the wolf being one of the animals hunted, as we read from the Saxon Chronicles, and subsequent to this, when we find forest laws laid down and often severely executed, a curious exception is made in the case of the wolf. No law protected it. It might be killed whenever opportunity offered, and by men in almost any grade of society. It was in Saxon times that the earliest historical mention is made of wolves in Yorkshire. In Athelstan's reign, wolves abounded so in Yorkshire that a retreat was built by one Alhorn at Flixton near Filey, in that county, wherein travellers might seek refuge if attacked by them. More inward stands Flixton, where a hospital was built in the time of Athelstan for defending travellers from wolves, as it is word for word in the public records, that they should not be devoured by them. It is currently believed that a farmhouse between the villages of Flixton and Staxton now stands on the site of this hospital. It was restored and confirmed in 1447 by the name of Canon's Spittle, and was dissolved about 1535. The farm is still called Spittal Farm, and a small stream running by it is called Spittle Brook, Harting. The same author mentions that Leulfus, a dean of Whalley in the time of Canute, was celebrated as a wolf hunter at Rosendale, Lancashire, and also, quoting from Freeman, that when Waltheof the son of Siward, with an invading Danish army, arrived in the Humber in September 1069, and reinforced by the men of Northumbria, made an attack upon York, it is related that 3,000 Normans fell. 100 of the chiefest in rank were said to have fallen amongst the flames by the hand of Waltheof himself, and the Skalds of the north sang how the son of Siward gave the corpses of the Frenchmen as a choice banquet for the wolves of Northumberland. In Durham, before the conquest, it is also stated that during the 11th century a great increase of wolves took place in Richmondshire, and from Dugdale we learn that Conan, Duke of Brittany and Earl of Richmond, in 1164 granted amongst other privileges to the Abbey of Jouvaux several pastures on the north side of the River Yore, reserving only liberty for his deer, likewise pasturage throughout his new forest near Richmond, Yorkshire, for all their cattle, with power to keep hounds for chasing wolves out of those their territories. Items occur in the account of Bolton Priory, which state that wolves existed in Craven in the beginning of the 14th century. Somewhat later than this, too, certain woods were granted in Yorkshire, saving their free warren of goats, foxes, wolves, conies, etc. In Edward III's time, Conan, Duke of Brittany, in 1342, gave pasture for cattle through all his forest at Richmond, in Yorkshire, to the inmates of the Abbey of Fors, in Wensleydale, forbidding them to use any mastiffs to drive wolves from their pastures. In the same year, Alan, Earl of Brittany, gave them common of pasture through all his forest of Wandersleydale, and to cut as much grass for hay as they might have occasion for, and also gave them leave to take such materials out of the said forest to build their houses, and for other uses, and such iron and lead as the monks found they might apply to their own use. And if the monks or their servants found any flesh of wild beasts in their forest, killed by wolves, they might take it to their own use. Mr. Harting tells us that during the years 1377 to 1399, in Richard II's reign, wolves must have been common enough in the forests of Yorkshire, for in the account of the rolls of Whitby Abbey, amongst the disbursements made between 1394 and 1396, we find the following entry of a payment for dressing wolfskins. Pro chewing, to chew or taw, an obsolete word signifying to beat and dress leather with alum. XIIJ Pellium Luporum 10 IXD. Doubtless the skins of animals killed in some great raid made upon them, at the instigation of the Abbey. The wolds of Yorkshire appear, from the dates of parish books, to have been infested with wolves perhaps later than any other part of England. In the entries at Flixton, Haxton and Folkestone, in the East Riding of Yorkshire, says Blaine, are still to be seen memoranda of payments made for the destruction of wolves at a certain rate per head. They used to breed in the cars below, amongst the rushes, furze and bogs, and in the night time to come up from their dens, and unless the sheep had been previously driven into the town, or the shepherds were indefatigably vigilant, great numbers were sure to be destroyed. Apparently, however, some error has been made in the orthography of the localities referred to. Flixton is in the parish of Folkestone, near Scarborough. We cannot find that there is any such place as Haxton, but Staxton adjoins the other places named, and is in the parish of Willerby. The vicar of Willerby, the Reverend G. Day, at our request most obligingly instituted a search, but could not succeed in finding any parish books of any kind to throw light on the subject. He writes, "There are no gentry resident in this parish, and the churchwardens have been tenant farmers for generations. Of course, great changes have occurred within the last, say, 50 years amongst these tenant farmers. Many names have altogether disappeared." In a paper on Druidical Remains in the parish of Halifax, Yorkshire, the Reverend John Watson, M.A., F.S.A., the author, says that in the township of Barkisland is a small ring of stones now called, 1771, by the name of the Wolf Fold. It is but a few yards in diameter, but the exact measurement of it I have lost or mislaid. It has been already stated that wolves probably became extinct in England during the reign of Henry VIII, in Scotland about 1740, and in Ireland not until 1760. Yorkshire, extinct, formerly abundant. There is conclusive evidence of various kinds to show not only that this animal occurred, but that in former times it was abundant in the county, and that there is good reason to believe that it lingered longer in Yorkshire than elsewhere in England, and as late as the reign of Henry VII. There is documentary evidence of the existence of wolves at Flixton on the Wolds in the time of Athelstan, at Roche Abbey in 1186, at Bolton in Waltheof in 1306, and at Whitby in 1369. Evidence less precise but equally credible proves that they inhabited Knaresborough and Galtres forests, Langwith near York, Marske in Swaledale, and various places in South Yorkshire, as Woolley, Dodworth, Silkston, Orton, Ully and Slade Hutton. Local legends in which the wolf plays a prominent part are related for Syttenham, in the Forest of Galtres, for John o' Gaunt's Inn near Rothwell, and for Howley Hall near Batley. Bones have been found in caves at Kirkdale and Dowker Bottom, as well as in river deposits. Clark and Roebuck. End of article.